Welcome back to Legacy Contracts. And if this is your first time here, we're glad you found us. This channel exists for attorneys who sense that something beneath the surface of their firm isn't quite working, even if it's hard to name. Here, we look beyond surface-level efficiency and into the invisible systems shaping how your firm operates, serves clients, and sustains growth. Through practical insight and honest conversation, we help bring clarity to what's often overlooked, so you can lead with intention, not assumption. If you're interested in building a law firm that's not just functional but thoughtfully designed, you're in the right place. Let's begin. Have you ever looked at two people inside your law firm doing essentially the same job and wondered why the results are so different? One person gets things done quickly. The other needs more follow-up. One consistently communicates with clients, the other misses steps. One seems to know exactly what to do when something unusual happens. The other brings the same situation back to leadership. And the natural question becomes, what's wrong with the person? Maybe they need more training. Maybe they aren't as organized. Maybe they don't take enough initiative. Maybe you hired the wrong person. But before making that conclusion, there is another question worth asking. What if the inconsistency isn't coming from the people? What if the system itself is producing inconsistent results? At Legacy Contracts, this is one of the operational patterns we pay close attention to. Because a healthy law firm shouldn't have to depend on having the perfect person in every position just to produce a predictable result. The goal isn't to eliminate individual judgment. The goal is to build enough structure that capable people can produce consistent outcomes without constantly improvising. So today, we're going to look at why your law firm may be inconsistent and what you can actually do about it. Consistency is not the same as having good employees. One of the easiest ways to misdiagnose an operational problem is to look at the person before looking at the system. Imagine two paralegals are given the same workflow. They've been told the same basic steps, but one produces the expected result and the other doesn't. The first instinct is usually to compare the employees. Who is more experienced? Who is more organized? Who needs additional training? Who is more detail-oriented? Those questions may be appropriate, but there is another set of questions that often gets overlooked. Did both people understand what the completed outcome was supposed to look like? Did they have the same authority to make decisions? Did they have access to the same information? Did they understand who owned the next step? Did they know what to do when the process didn't go exactly as expected? Those differences matter, because simply giving two people the same workflow doesn't necessarily mean you've given them the same system. A workflow tells someone what happens next. A system also has to tell them who owns it, what decisions they can make, what happens when something changes, when they should escalate, and what done actually means. That's where consistency begins. Your process may be documented, but your system may not be. This is an important distinction. A lot of law firms have procedures. They may have checklists. They may have training documents. They may have software that tells employees what task comes next. And those things are valuable. The American Bar Association specifically identifies standardized operating procedures and process mapping as tools that can help law firms create more consistent work, clarify responsibilities, reduce errors, and improve training. But documentation by itself doesn't guarantee consistency. Why? Because a document can tell someone what to do without explaining the structure surrounding the work. For example, imagine your firm has a documented client intake procedure. The steps are clearly written. But what happens when the potential client doesn't fit the standard intake criteria? Who makes that decision? Does the intake specialist decide? Does the paralegal? Does an attorney? Does the managing partner? And what happens if the person responsible isn't available? If those questions aren't answered, the documented process ends exactly where the uncertainty begins. And that's where inconsistency enters. One employee may make a reasonable decision. Another may ask for approval. Another may interpret the situation differently. And now you have three different outcomes from the same process. The problem isn't necessarily that anyone failed to follow the procedure. The procedure simply wasn't designed to account for the decision points surrounding it. The five places inconsistency usually enters. When Legacy evaluates operational consistency, there are five areas we would encourage a managing partner to examine. First, expectations. Does everyone understand what a successful outcome looks like? Complete the intake. Process the records request. Prepare the file. Those instructions may sound clear until you ask, what does completed actually mean? If different people have different definitions, you're going to get different results. Second, ownership. Who is actually responsible for the outcome? There's a difference between assigning someone a task and assigning them ownership. If someone is responsible for completing one step but someone else is ultimately responsible for making sure the outcome happens, that distinction needs to be visible. Otherwise, work begins moving between people. Third, authority. This is one of the biggest sources of inconsistency. People may know what they're supposed to do but not know whether they're allowed to make the decision required to do it, so they stop. They ask someone else. They wait. They send an email. They escalate. And suddenly the managing partner is involved in something that should never have required their attention. Fourth, decision pathways. Every recurring workflow has moments where something doesn't go according to the standard process. That's normal. The question is whether your firm has already decided what happens next. If not, every employee creates their own answer. That's how inconsistency becomes embedded in the workflow. And fifth, handoffs. A surprising amount of operational inconsistency happens between people rather than within their individual responsibilities. Someone finishes their part. The work moves to someone else. But what information needs to accompany it? Who confirms the handoff? What tells the next person that the work is ready? What happens if something is missing? If those expectations aren't clear, the process becomes dependent on individual habits. And individual habits are difficult to standardize. Why this becomes more obvious as a firm grows. Inconsistency often becomes more visible as a law firm grows. That's because growth increases the number of people interacting with the same systems. A process that worked when 3 people were involved may become unreliable when 10 people are involved. Not because the original process was necessarily bad, but because it was never designed for the complexity that growth introduced. Think about what happens as a firm adds people. More handoffs, more decisions, more clients, more matters, more exceptions, more opportunities for information to get lost, more people interpreting the same instructions. At a certain point, informal coordination stops being enough. This is why some firms experience a strange phenomenon during growth. They have more people, but leadership feels more involved than ever. The firm added capacity, but it didn't necessarily add structure. And when structure doesn't keep pace with growth, leadership often becomes the mechanism holding everything together. The managing partner catches the missed detail, answers the question, corrects the inconsistency, resolves the client issue, clarifies the expectation, and the firm keeps moving. But every time that happens, the immediate problem gets solved without necessarily solving the structural reason it happened. Consistency doesn't mean everyone does everything the same way. There's an important misconception about consistency that we want to address. Consistency does not mean turning your law firm into a rigid environment where nobody can use judgment. Law firms require judgment. Clients are different. Matters are different. Circumstances change. Exceptions happen. The goal isn't to eliminate professional judgment. It's to determine where judgment belongs. Routine decisions can be standardized. Certain thresholds can be documented. Ownership can be clarified. Escalation points can be defined. And exceptions can have a clear path. That actually gives your team more room to exercise judgment where judgment is valuable. Instead of asking leadership about everything, they know which decisions they can make independently and which situations genuinely require escalation. That is a very different kind of consistency. It's not about making everyone behave identically. It's about making the system predictable enough that people know how to operate inside it, how to start fixing inconsistency. So if you're noticing inconsistent results inside your firm, where should you start? Don't begin by assuming you need to retrain everyone. Start with one recurring process. Choose something where you've noticed different people producing different outcomes. Then ask 5 questions. What should the outcome be? Who owns it? Who is allowed to make the decisions along the way? What happens when the normal process doesn't apply? And where does the work go next? Those 5 questions can reveal more about your operational structure than simply reviewing whether someone followed a checklist. Because the objective isn't simply to document what your firm currently does. It's to understand whether the structure surrounding that work is actually capable of producing the result you want. If your law firm is producing inconsistent results, the answer may not be that you have inconsistent employees. You may have an inconsistent system, and that distinction matters. Because if the problem is the person, you may need training, coaching, or a different role. But if the problem is the system, replacing the person won't solve it. You'll simply introduce another capable person into the same structure and eventually encounter the same problem again. Consistency isn't something you can ask your team to produce through effort alone. It has to be supported by clear expectations, defined ownership, appropriate authority, documented decision pathways, and reliable handoffs. That's what allows a firm to produce predictable outcomes without requiring leadership to personally oversee every step. At Legacy Contracts, we believe operational health isn't about creating more rules or more complexity. It's about designing the structure that allows good people to do good work consistently. If your firm is growing and you're beginning to notice that outcomes depend too heavily on who is handling the work, that may be a signal that it's time to look at the system underneath the workflow. Because consistency isn't a people problem to solve. It's a structure to design. If you'd like to learn more about how Legacy Contracts helps law firms identify operational gaps, clarify ownership, and build systems that support sustainable growth, you'll find additional resources below. And if this conversation sounds familiar, we invite you to explore the Structural Clarity Assessment to begin identifying where operational inconsistency may be originating inside your firm. We hope today's insight helped bring clarity to something that may have been operating quietly in the background of your firm. Progress doesn't always start with doing more. It often starts with seeing more clearly. Law firms aren't built overnight. They're shaped by the decisions you make once the invisible becomes visible. This is Legacy Contracts, and until next time, keep leading with clarity.